Welcome back, spirits and souls. This episode is all about preparing for the coming winter. To do that, I will need to fix the cellar for food storage, build a new addition to the treehouse, and cook enough food to get through the winter. But first, I have to survive this incoming temporal storm. So far, I have been perfectly safe in the treehouse each time, so I'm sure I won't need to enclose myself behind a fence like I have each storm before now. I was wrong. I was very, very wrong, which meant I had to run all the way home in the dark while everything around me warped and monsters continually spawned. Thankfully, the post-death glow helped me see as I made my way through forest and hills. By the time the storm waned, I was starving, but at least I was almost home. I gathered my things, choked down a bowl of food, and sighed in relief. Now I could begin the real work of fixing the cellar. Right now, the wood roof was supposedly diminishing the effectiveness of the room. So, I decided to dig down into the stone below to create a more insulated space. Each time I dug, the dirt collapsed into the space, which meant I would have to remove all of it and replace the dirt with something more stable. It was exceptionally annoying, and I was starting to regret playing with block instability on soil. But soon I was digging below stone, and the dirt was no longer falling on my head. I took a brief break to make new clay bowls, so I would have additional oil lamps for the cellar. I was tired of constantly replacing torches and wasn't ready to make any of the better light sources yet. I returned to mining out the new cellar and decided this would be a good opportunity to test the stone stability. One of the walls suddenly cracked and collapsed as I mined, proving it wasn't just the ceiling I had to worry about. Each time I mined another layer, I would check the stability percent. I ended up with a surprisingly big space before the stone had cracked moments before collapsing, and dirt quickly filled the room. As I dug it away, water started flowing in. I would need to start using supports if I wanted to make the cellar any bigger. I grabbed some logs, since they would look the nicest, and started filling in the ceiling with rammed earth, which I hoped was both stable and a good insulator. I moved the log pillars so I would have more space for storage. There was the chance the presence of wood, even within the confines of the room, would reduce the effectiveness of the cellar. I would have to test it once the room was complete. Night had fallen, so I slept the darkness away, added stairs to the tunnel, and watched more of the ceiling collapse. As I placed more blocks, I heard my chickens and realized the collapsed area was far too close to the chicken pen. I went outside, and sure enough, there was risk of my chickens escaping, as well as an annoying bowtorn causing problems. I had to retreat to make a new spear, and once again was killed by a bowtorn. These things are officially the absolute worst. I returned as quickly as I could, collected my things, and started filling in the hole, which continuously collapsed with each effort. In hindsight, I probably should have used packed earth or any other sturdier block, but that would require digging everything up again, and I was tired of digging. Instead, I turned my focus to creating support beams. This was the first time I had ever used them, and so there was a bit of a learning curve as I figured out the mechanics. Annoyingly, it did not seem like I could remove the beams once they were placed. If anyone knows how I can fix this mess, please let me know. Or is this something that can only be done with a mod? As it got darker, I made sure my animals were fed and made a new set of doors for the new cellar. I then began moving the clay storage vessels into the new space and organizing the food inside. By now, the clay bowls were finished, so I used animal fat to turn them into oil lamps, and then stared at the unwelcome visitors outside my door. I decided to arm myself and make a run for it rather than wait for them to leave. By this point, I had collected a number of interesting materials and decided to display the best ones in the glass case I had stolen from the ruins. These treasures included a rose quartz and a diamond. I then started a pot of hefty vegetable stew before crafting some shelves for storing food. Now I could test out the effectiveness of my storage setup. The most obvious test was comparing the decay rate in the cellar versus outside it. In the cellar, with the doors closed, the soup would be fresh for about 19 days. Outside the cellar, it was good for about 4. Annoyingly, a drifter appeared in my cellar. Perhaps one of the corners was too dark. For now, I moved the oil lamps and hoped it would be enough. The next step would be filling the cellar with food. So, I made a new spear and set out to go hunting. It wasn't long before I found some native copper and decided to go mining instead. I used packed dirt to keep most of the ground from collapsing while I retrieved the copper below. Eventually, a drifter interrupted my work, but by then I had gathered nearly all the copper ore. I tried to get the last little bit, but drifters kept appearing and my health was dropping fast. I decided to return home and stopped only to collect blueberries, kill a drifter, and gather gravel. I also found another apple tree, this time a yellow one. It only had one branch I could take, but that was fine since I would need time to expand the orchard. I returned home and started a pot of sunflower seed porridge. I wish I had saved some blueberries to put on top, but at least I would have more food to eat. As I waited for my food to cook, I opened the handbook and researched the type of clothes I could make with bearskin. It seemed there were specialized outfits available, though I was undecided on whether or not I wanted to wear such things. Morning came, and I busied myself with watering my crops. Sadly, not all of them appreciated the warm weather. I would have to start dividing them by temperature preference, so I could better plan the planting seasons. For now, any amount of food was good, and even stunted plants still provided extra seeds. I could worry about optimizing plant growth once I was better established. I was tempted to build the new smithing expansion of the storage shed, but I had more important things to take care of first, starting with replacing the log pillars of the cellar with stone. I tried both solid cobblestone blocks and dry stone fences. The crock pot showed about 17 days with the log pillars, and 19 days once they had been replaced with cobblestone. Both cobblestone blocks and fences had the same effect, so I decided to stick with the blocks since they looked better. Otherwise, a 2-day difference between logs and stone doesn't seem like that big of a deal. Perhaps if more of the cellar had been made with wood, the difference would have become significant. But a couple pillars for aesthetic flair seemed worth the 2-day loss. At least if appearance matters that much to you. For me, I think I like the cobblestone. Now that the cellar was optimized, I needed a way to fill it with food, or at least enough food to get me through whatever winter might be coming my way. I also needed to hope these 2 side-by-side rifts wouldn't become a problem. I once again regretted building my home in a swamp as I endured the incessant hum of insects while starting a pot of porridge and fruit. While I waited for the food to cook, I considered how I would expand my treehouse. Ultimately, I needed an enclosed space that would keep out the cold weather and allow enough room for storing treasures. If I needed more room, I could build additional extensions as needed. But first, food. I considered making another pot of porridge, but what I really needed was meat, and before that, I needed a means of storing the food for an extended period of time. The sun would set soon, so I hurried to the storage shed to grab some clay, and on returning to my house, I started another pot of porridge before making 16 clay crockpots. Morning arrived with a fog thicker than my porridge, and a drifter seeking the pointy end of my spear. There were also a couple bowtorn, but they retreated behind the rifts, and I had no desire to follow them. For some reason, the fog reached all the way into my cellar, which was an odd and spooky experience. I had made several porridge pots at this point, and some onion soup, all of which would hopefully last long enough for me to hunt something more filling. Meat stew with vegetables provided the most saturation, but I had to do some prep before I could go hunting. I began with feeding my animals. The chicken needed to stay full if it was going to hatch the eggs. The goat already had a baby on the way, but I wasn't sure if it still needed to be fed or not. I chose to ignore the pig, as I still didn't have a sow. Farm chores done, I headed to the forest, collected mushrooms and carrots, and stopped short when I saw a bear. It wasn't the type of meat I needed, but it would keep me satiated until I could find better hunting. So I dug a pit trap and got its attention. I was rewarded with 10 bushmeat, a black bear hide, and enough fat to cure it. The hide with the head can be used for unique garments, but I had yet to decide if I wanted to go that fashion route. In the meanwhile, they made nice rugs. I continued to wander in the direction I remember seeing a herd of deer some time before, although, with all the time that had passed, they had likely migrated elsewhere. I found some lead ore, but little else of interest. On my way back, I spotted a single deer, but by then it was growing dark, and I quickly lost it. So I returned home and started cooking the bushmeat. The next day, rain poured down as I set up the crock pots in the pit kiln. I probably should have done this before I went hunting, and I have no explanation for why I didn't. I suppose I must have gotten distracted. Gathering dried grass for the pit kilns was much easier now that I had a scythe, though the endurance was dropping quickly. I would have to make another one soon. At least the animal pens looked nicer without the weeds. A bit of peat and fire, and the kilns were ready. In the meanwhile, I checked my garden, harvested my cattails, and collected more clay. I took a moment to look for something to hunt, and managed to find a single deer. Unfortunately, it disappeared into a cave, so I gathered some berry bushes instead. The next day, I expanded the orchard. There were other types of fruit trees about, and I wanted to make sure I had plenty of room to include them once I could harvest their branches. This took more dirt than expected, and I eventually decided to finish the expansion at a later time. In the meanwhile, one of the saplings had died. I got a new one from the pink apple tree and planted it with the rest. I also relocated some cranberry bushes to the berry field. Back in my cellar, I realized I was running out of room and needed better organization. I started by collecting the new crock pots, making more shelves, and collecting the rest of the new crock pots, and then being surprised to find not one, but 2 bowtorn in my cellar. Apparently the space was not mob-proof, at least not yet. In the meanwhile, I needed a new scythe and more storage. While the forge heated my bronze, I started a new storage vessel in clay. I got a couple layers down before grabbing the hot bronze and beating out some nails and a scythe blade. The blade could be immediately attached to a stick, but the nails needed to be thrown in water, or so I thought. I could have used them immediately to make chests, but I am a silly squirrel, and so not only did I throw them in the water, I also used my bare hands to do it. In hindsight, I could have used the tongs or even dropped them straight out of my inventory, but my brain was not braining that day, and so I did not. I finished the clay vessel I had started and decided to make another one as darkness quickly claimed my ability to see. I eventually remembered I had a torch and used it to collect the dry grass, sticks, and peat I needed to fire the pit kilns. Another day done. I started the next day by placing one double chest in the storage hut and one in the cellar. I then started testing different foods to see which ones needed to stay in clay vessels and which ones could be placed in the chest. To my surprise, berries and soybeans seemed to be the only things I could put in the chest. The soybeans could be pickled in salt brine or baked in a pie. I had neither salt nor fire clay, so neither of those things were happening anytime soon. I would have to wait until I could make a quern to grind the materials, and that would have to wait for next time. What I could do was make barrels. I would use some for storing rot, which would eventually become compost, and some for storing honey. I also set a few aside for making leather, but that also needed a quern, so it would have to wait. In the meanwhile, I made more skeps and started harvesting honey. The bees were quite angry and only attacked the dummy a few times before flying off and attacking my boar. I panicked, worried they would kill it, but the boar only took a couple hits before running away. They then went after my chickens. Thankfully, the fence stopped them. I don't know if the grown chicken and rooster could have survived, but I do know the chicks would have died for sure. The bees finally died, so I killed a bowtorn in my cellar, squeezed out some honey, and put the wax in the storage shed. Much more than honey, I needed the wax to seal crockpots, or I would once I had food worth storing. The storage vessels were finally ready, so I spent some time organizing the food in my cellar. The vegetables and mushrooms each had their own vessel. I also put the eggs and fat in a separate vessel, and if I had meat, it would be stored in the same spot. I started gathering materials to improve my house, but got distracted by my garden. Putting all the wood away, I started pulling weeds and harvesting anything that was mature. I replanted what I could and stored the additional food in the cellar. Back in my house, I noted the poor condition of my clothes. I would need something better soon. I also noted that the longer nights meant I could no longer sleep through the darkness. So I hurried back to the shed to grab some building materials, slept as much as I could, and then started building a staircase to the upper part of my treehouse. I decided to keep the branches as a nod to the tree within the new structure, and then started laying out fanned cobblestone. I struggled with orienting the pattern and eventually gave up and placed them wherever I wanted a stone floor. Since I was making this up as I went, I ended up placing and removing several components until I was satisfied with the footprint. It essentially came down to 3 shapes: a smaller area for a bedroom, a larger living space, and a fireplace. I made the fireplace big so I could store any food and cooking-related things next to the fire, and have room to expand if desired. I wanted a nice big window, so I made the walls 4 blocks high. I used logs in the corners to represent the branches of the trees which supported my home. I didn't yet have a roof, but the space felt cozy and warm. I decided to put in a ceiling with the idea that the roof would then create an attic, which meant I needed a ladder to that space. I then ran out of materials for the roof, so I fed my chickens and started chopping more bald cypress trees. I was surprised to see the bits of chopped log floating away in the water. What a nice little detail. And how fun that the logs bounced and bobbed in the water after falling. I really do love all the details in this game. The developers didn't have to put that much thought into it, and yet they did. If I ever get the chance, I hope I can tell them how much I appreciate their efforts. Returning to the roof, I now had enough materials to finish the design. The resulting attic was small, but it would be perfect for storing random knickknacks. I put an oil lamp in the attic so mobs wouldn't spawn, and then emptied my pockets in the storage hut. I moved both my bed and the second bearskin to the new space and slept in the new bedroom. The next morning, I collected more branches from the apple tree, just in case I needed them. I was pretty sure the saplings would remain usable, even in storage, so I placed the extras in the reed chest where I planned to keep cattails and clay for making skeps. I made sure to collect more honey while I was at it. So long as at least one hive still had bees, the skeps would keep replenishing. The bees were not happy I kept breaking their homes, and I was starting to think I needed more dummies to distract their rage. So, once again, I grabbed my scythe and collected dry grass. I made one new dummy for now. I could make more later. I needed more cattails, so I spent some time collecting them. This time, the bees were especially angry. They even chased me outside the apiary. The dummy would only distract them for a little while before they went after me again. Such angry bees. In the meanwhile, my peach trees finally took root. It wasn't all of them, but it was a start. I squeezed out more honey and then spent some time watering my garden. I collected lots more clay and then harvested my plants until my pockets were full. I then remembered I could make a bucket, which meant I could create new water sources, which also meant I could place water in spots that would keep the moisture level of my crops up. I was also running low on food, which meant I would need to either cook or go hunting soon. I was already focused on watering my crops, so I decided to do that first. I made slabs from the peridotite and used it to create a border on the upper farm level. This way, I could hide the water sources. I don't know how far the water would reach, so I would have to wait for the water source to start affecting the soil. I made sure to place some of the sources in dry areas. That way, the effect would be more obvious. I would likely have to add more of these, but I decided to space them out in the meanwhile so I could better see their reach. While creating a source block on the lower level, the block fell into the source hole and I needed to remove another block to reach it. This created an accidental waterfall. I loved how it looked, so I touched it up a bit and decided to keep it. I might add more later. After placing water sources on the first level, I returned to the second level and could see where the water had reached. So far, it went up to 3 blocks out, with 75% moisture at the closest and 25% moisture at the furthest. The growth rate seemed faster with the higher moisture percent, and I wondered if the percent would double if 2 sources overlapped. I decided to test this by placing a source on the opposite side of the farmland. Unfortunately, it looked like it would rain again soon, which meant I would have to wait to find out if this worked. I also received the warning for the incoming temporal storm, which seemed to occur at least once an episode, although this time it was twice in one episode. My current home did not have any good places to hide, so I grabbed some fences and secured a corner of the cellar just as the storm began to warp my surroundings. I waited patiently, watching as a couple drifters and then a bowtorn manifested in the cellar. They seemed unaware of my presence. If nothing more dangerous appeared, I could handle them once the storm waned. The bowtorn disappeared on its own, and I only took a bit of damage from the drifters. By now, it was getting dark. I was tired of being unable to sleep through the night, so I grabbed enough materials to make an upgraded bed. I also made a door while I was at it, since that was something else I needed. As I drifted off to sleep, I reminded myself that I still needed windows. It was nice to finally get a proper night's rest. Unfortunately, I was starving and had used up all my meals. I munched on some cranberries and decided I could not wait any longer to go hunting. I needed meat. As I napped a new spear, I used up the last of my flint and started looking for more. Instead, I found quartz, and a lot of it. This reminded me I needed windows for my house, and with some clear quartz, I could make quartz windows. So I gathered every bit I could find. I also found a shiver and found the flint I needed to finish making my spears. Since I was near the peach tree, I thought I would check it for new branches. To my joy, I found a herd of deer instead. Now I just needed to catch them. I dug a pit, but unfortunately, herding them into that pit was a challenge. First, I needed to know exactly where the pit was, so I had to mark it on my map. I also had to make the pit longer to increase my odds of catching the deer. I made some pillars so I could see where it was from a distance. I stopped to confirm the peach tree did not have new branches and failed to hunt a pig. I finally got a deer in the pit, only for it to jump out again. I clearly needed a deeper pit. Plus, it was getting dark. Rift activity was calm, but the area was temporally unstable, which meant I couldn't stay for long. I tried to chase another deer into the pit in the dark, and it sort of worked, except the sides of the pit collapsed, so I had to replace them with packed dirt. Finally, I succeeded in catching one deer in the pit. 8 red meat, 2 raw hides, 1 fat, and a set of antlers. By now, my pockets were full, which was fine. I didn't really need the dirt anymore. I decided to sleep through the night and continue hunting once the sun was up. What came next was a lot of herding. I caught a second deer, and then the atmosphere shifted. The temporal instability was starting to take its toll, and the haunting sounds started to fill the air. I still had time to hunt, but the universe was warning me not to press my luck too far. I caught 1 more deer, bringing my total loot to 34 red meat, 6 raw hides, 4 fat, and 2 antlers. This would be plenty to get me started. At the very least, I would have some proper meat-based stews to last me through the winter. I used to have a raft. I even had a marker on my map claiming I had left it in a specific location. I had no idea if my raft was still there, but seeing as it was raining heavily, I didn't think I would get any more wet by swimming home. Back at the storage hut, I emptied my pockets as best I could while grabbing a few ingredients and crock pots. I checked on my chickens and was happy to see the chicks had grown into pullets. Hopefully, I would eventually get a cockerel so I could retire the old rooster. But a new generation of hens was also good. Back at the hut, I started my first batch of meals. While the pot bubbled and boiled, I made a second cookpot to keep by the storage hut, and made my first windows. I did not have enough quartz for all the windows I needed, but it was a start. I would have to go mining to collect more. I also used some fat to start curing the hides. I would need them for winter wear soon enough. I also made more bowls in hope I could make more oil lamps soon. As each meal finished, I started the next one and used the beeswax to seal the pots. I munched away on a few carrots to keep myself from starving. I didn't want to eat any of the good meals yet. Those I would save for the winter. Though I did make one to eat immediately, since there wasn't enough meat left for a full crock pot. I started a vegetable stew while I hurried to the cellar to store the sealed crock pots. I then collected more grass so I could fire the clay cookpot and bowls. My coal pit had a single quartz vein, but it was not the kind for windows. I grabbed more crock pots and headed back to continue my meal prep. After the vegetable stews were done, I harvested my garden, replanted the crops, fed my chickens, and collected more ingredients. This time I was making porridge, but not just any porridge. This porridge had both berries and honey. I used both cranberries and blackberries for it. By the time I was done, I had 15 meals prepped and sealed for the winter. I would probably need more, but I had plenty of ingredients, and this was enough to get me started. Now I could focus on finishing my house. Before that, I harvested the cattails, collected more dry grass, and collected more honey. The bees continued to be a menace, which forced me to reconsider where I placed the dummies. I still stole all their honey, so perhaps I'm the true menace from their perspective. I once again had to brutalize a bowtorn and was rewarded for my cruelty with a temporal gear. When asked the question of violence, the answer continues to be yes. I decided I needed a couple more dummies to distract the bees, but was forced to flee to my home before I could set them up. Since it was still too early to sleep, I began moving my treasures and other decorative items to the new living space of my house. The larger room felt empty compared to my starter house. I made a note to make appropriate furniture in the future. Perhaps that would be a good task for the winter months. The following morning, I collected more cattails, roots and all, so I could plant them in the farm. More chicks had hatched, but too many would make it harder to advance the generations. So I retired the original hen. I would have to be more careful about collecting eggs and providing early retirement to the younger hens. I allowed a minor distraction by creating a water source by the barrels in the storage hut. This way, it would be much easier to fill them with water for creating leather, a task that would have to wait for next time. I cooked a couple more meals in the clay pavilion and then set out to find quartz. I immediately got distracted by the discovery of high fertility soil and then fought a shiver. It was getting dark, so I returned home. I had another problem. I was low on materials for making bronze. I likely would not be able to create more bismuth bronze, but I could certainly find enough material for tin bronze. But I would save that for next time. For now, I needed to finish my home, and that meant finding quartz. Quartz is pretty much everywhere, so while I could just dig where I had found surface quartz, it might actually be easier to search for rock faces with exposed quartz. I had to travel very far, enough so that my food was starting to run low. I did find a new trader by the name of Zadok, and near Zadok was the very quartz I needed. As I dug, I made cobblestone fences to place as supports, in hopes they would keep the stone from collapsing on my head. I avoided being buried alive, so I assume they worked. I eventually started to starve, so I set out to find vegetables and berries. I also found a shiver, which escaped into the dark of the night. I took shelter with Zadok and waited for the sun to rise before returning to mine more quartz. To my joy, I found gold hiding within the stone. The quartz vein was huge. I had more than enough clear quartz to finish my home and a decent amount of gold to boot. I was also starving once again and decided now was the time to return home. I stopped for a bit of peat and finally got back. I made the windows and finished my home. Now I was ready for winter. Thank you for watching, as always. I hope you enjoyed the video. And remember, take care of yourself.